All right, hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word verse by verse. Grab your Bibles and follow along as we continue in our study through the Gospel of Matthew, verse by verse and chapter by chapter. Let me do a public announcement here. Um, the aim of this Daily Word verse by verse study is to, again, just go through in the most simple, plain fashion as God intended the word to be, as he gave the word, in the most simple, excuse me, in plain form. So we're not, we're not, if you notice, I don't go, I don't refer to commentaries, and I don't refer to a lot of, I don't refer to a lot of commentaries and, and what men say. And here's the reason why. I don't discount theological training in general, just in general. I do discount, you know, their training uh, as they are biased and tend to be one-sided, and in terms of uh, their slant, their theological slants or denominational slants. So that's not our aim here. In other words, simply what is how God gave it. And again, he gave it in simple, plain fashion. All right, so we are in chapter 14, and um, he says, verse 1, at that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard the report about Jesus. This is John the Baptist. He told his servants, he has been raised from the dead, and that is why supernatural powers are at work in him. Now, before I get to this, let me give you the background on Herod. Excuse me. Herod, the term tetrarch means one of four. Herod, Herod, Herod inherited his kingdom. He was a ruler under Rome. Now, if you notice, I always get this wrong here. This map here, the one in the pink, all pink, that was his father's kingdom, and he ruled pretty much most of Israel under Rome. Okay, and remember, um, since the Babylonian invasion, which from John the Baptist time, Jesus time, about 500 years. Okay, and ever since then, Israel has been really just kind of bounced from one world kingdom to the other. Okay, one of the other things that's kind of it's interesting, going back to Daniel chapter 2. You notice we refer to Daniel chapter 2 and the book of Daniel. It is so pertinent here. It is so vital, and to me, to understanding, of course, what is going on here. Why Israel is the way it is at this present time, as far as even during the time of Jesus. The the Daniel chapter 2, when God gives Nebuchadnezzar this dream in the form of a human body, and it represented the world kingdoms, the four major world kingdoms from the time of Daniel, which included Nebuchadnezzar. He was the head of gold, and all the way to the end of the age, which will usher in the age of the man of sin, or the Antichrist. And then that will conclude with Jesus destroying the human government. Now, ever since this time, Israel has been not, in a sense, you could say, a freestanding sovereign state. They were, from the time of Nebuchadnezzar they were always under the rule and providence of one of those four kingdoms. So it was Nebuchadnezzar, then the Medes and Persians, Alexander the Great, the Grecian kingdom, Rome. Herod the Great was, as you can see, the stretch of his kingdom. And again, these kingdoms were given by Rome. So when you look at different ruling groups, for example, the Sanhedrin, which was the Pharisees, the Sadducees, law of the scribes, they were in rulership under or by permission of Rome. King Herod the Great, as you see, his kingdom stretches at a pretty good part of Israel. Now, when we come to this on this side, upon Herod the Great's death, his kingdom was split up into four parts. Thus, the word Tetrarch. Now, if you see Galilee, which in green, this is Herod, and this is the Herod in which would ultimately John the Baptist would meet his fate. But as you can see, Herod of Galilee, or Antipas, he also would have been around the villages. He ruled around the villages of Jesus. Okay, so you can't probably see it on this screen right here because it's small print. But the villages, let me go to them. Parts of Galilee. This would have been Herod. Okay, Antipas. This would have been his rulership, which would include, of course, look at this number. Where's Nazareth at? Number 9, Nazareth. Oh, sorry, number 10, Nazareth, and then of course the region of Galilee. And of course, we hear a lot about Galilee, of course, in the scriptures. Okay, kind of important. I just want to give a visual of what is going on. So when we come to John the Baptist, now, so the political climate, Herod was a political leader appointed by Rome. The Pharisees were spiritual leaders permitted to rule by Rome. And if you think about this, moving on, you would see this kind of spiritual slash religious union where at times they're married and at times they're not married. This would go all the way to even really almost to the present time, but certainly when we think about the Catholic Church that ruled supreme during what they call the Middle Ages, and then which in the 15th century where the Protestant split came. So now we have the Catholic and the Protestant split. Well, what was also going on was this fight between church and state. And the king would oftentimes say that I'm God's appointed leader, supreme leader, they would argue. And the Pope would say, I'm the vicar of Christ. So, sorry, no, my popeness outranks your political reign. And then literally there was a fight going back and forth between there. They literally was going back and forth. Here's when they came to America. So the idea when they came to America, they was trying to get away from that more than anything else. And it wasn't that the people were so pious or even which we would call evangelical Bible believing people. They in their mind when they said the separation of church and state, they was thinking what was going on in Europe, which they fled from. When they would think about freedom of the press and freedom of speech, all of those things they did not have. Those freedoms they didn't have because a lot of times even you can speak out against the Pope without suffering consequences, and certainly the king. So Herod was, again, he inherited his kingdom, but he only inherited a fourth of the kingdom and around Galilee. So he says, now at the time, verse 1 again, Herod the Tetrarch heard the report of Jesus. And this is John the Baptist. He told his servants, he has been raised from the dead. That is why supernatural powers work in him. Now, it's kind of interesting why he concluded that. You also may want to wonder how come Herod, in a sense, is really not that familiar with Jesus. Even Pilate, when we get down to Pilate, Pilate is not that familiar with Jesus. Well, keep this in mind. There were no TV cameras. There were no social media at the time. And so pretty much while Jesus' fame certainly was all over Israel, uh, remember, kings isolated themselves from the common people. So it was very easy not to kind of know what was going on among the common people out there. And so, like, for example, when the Pharisees probably kind of raised, their objections to Jesus, that's when Pilate began to say, well, what's going on? Is there insurrection forming? They were more concerned about those things more so than just the popularity, let's say, of a spiritual guru running around running around Israel. So Herod was, like I say, pretty much isolated. He also was, remember, because he was a political puppet of Rome, he wasn't liked, so he was hated, just like the tax collectors. Um, and so um, it's very easy for him not to have kind of really known who Jesus was. But where he got the idea that John the Baptist, however, had kind of was reincarnated in the person of Jesus, I don't know where he got that from. But this is guilt. Probably is one of the main reasons why Herod was, that Herod was uh, thinking about John, and this is why in verse 3, for Herod had arrested John, chained him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, since John had been telling him, it is not lawful for you to have her. Though he wanted to kill him, he feared the crowd since they regarded him as a prophet. Now, Herod, remember, is a political figure. John became quite popular. Even the Pharisees liked John. They didn't like that he kind of targeted them and criticized them, but they liked John. They liked John more than they liked Jesus. And so, however, so every leader would have been afraid or fearful by arresting such a popular figure that a riot could erupt. Now, one of the reasons why also they didn't want riots to erupt is that part of Herod's responsibility was to keep Israel in check. And Rome didn't care when they conquered a people, a nation, a tribe, or whatever. They didn't care. They didn't necessarily seek to change their ways, make them Romans. That wasn't the object. However, they didn't tolerate insurrection. So insurrections would look bad. In fact, even Pilate had trouble. The Jews were stubborn people, and so and this is why, they were, you can say, ticking time bomb, because they couldn't afford bad reports, with Rome. Verse 6. But when Herod's birthday celebration came, uh, Herodias' daughter danced before them and pleased Herod. So he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. And prompted by her mother, she answered, give me John the Baptist's head on a platter. Now, this story, remember, you kind of have to think about this. Here John is telling the king. Now, Herod was a Jew, but he was a Jew under, that was appointed by Rome. John speaking to Herod as a Jew, saying, your marriage to your brother's wife, okay, was unlawful. Herodias nursed this grudge against him. She hated John. And even though Herod himself was incensed that this prophet was insulting him, you're like, okay, I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna mess with John. He didn't want the people wrestle. Now on the other side of it too, there was sort of some interest in John the Baptist too, because even, Herod kept him around in a sense for that. But you can see the depravity with Herod, this man and this group. So that, notice the daughter, his stepdaughter. Now think about this, his stepdaughter, which actually in a sense was an unlawful marriage anyway. He's pleased by his stepdaughter dancing some sensual dance. Think about that for a moment. And I'm tempted to go into present, but I won't. You know, some, I don't know, one of our presidents who had the preoccupation with his daughter. Okay. But anyway, but just think about that. Now, John had the courage to criticize him. And it's amazing to me, preachers of righteousness, so-called today, do not want to speak out on sin and different things like that. Herodias found her opportunity with this birthday celebration. Everybody's kind of tipsy. Again, the daughter dances, prompted by the mother. And so Herod says to her, I'll give you anything you want. Now, there's usually a statement there, up to half my kingdom, that they would oftentimes say. But just think about this. Out of all the things you could ask for, I mean, one, if a person in power, now I want you to think about this now. If a person in power said, I'll give you anything you want, right? Bill Gates, right? Steve Bezos, these guys have incredible amounts of money. Seriously, Steve Bezos have like 130 billion. If Steve Bezos came to you and said, I'll give you anything you want, what would you want? How would you answer that? And I happen to think, I wouldn't even just give me $1 billion, right? I mean, but anyway, but just think about this. What would you ask for? Would you not go back to this case right here? I'll give you anything you want. How about power, right? How about a piece of your kingdom, power? Now, think about this. Look. So, verse 7 again, verse 6. But when King's birthday celebration came, Herodias, the daughter, danced before them and pleased Herod. So he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. And being prompted by her mother, she asked, give me John the Baptist's head here on a platter. Talking about the depravity right here. Talking about the depravity that she asked. So verse 9, although the king regretted it, he commanded it to be granted because of his oath and his guest. In other words, he didn't want to look bad in front of his guest. He didn't really care about his oath, but okay, in front of the guest. So he sent orders and had John beheaded in prison, and his head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, who carried it to her mother. The disciples came and removed the corpse and buried it, and he went and reported it to Jesus. Now, again, think about this. Chops the head off. They put the head on the platter. Bring the head. Let me see if I can simulate this, right? All right, look at y'all. No, my body's showing, right? But anyway, they bring the head. Here, Merry Christmas. Gift. Happy birthday. She takes the head. What do you do with a severed head? What satisfaction do you get from a severed head? Now think about that. That's amazing, right? But that shows you the depravity too of what was going on with Herod. Okay. So, and did she get satisfaction from, I don't know, a severed head? Would you have satisfaction from a severed head? And like I said, I think if she could have asked, maybe she could have asked for power or money or wealth. She asked for a head, you know. But it also shows you sin, hatred, how how a person by the sin nature can be driven. Okay. Anyway, they reported to Jesus, and they buried his corpse. They didn't have his head, and then they reported to Jesus. And look at this, verse 13. When Jesus heard about it, he withdrew from there by boat to a remote place to be alone. Now, this remote place could be um, Gennesaret or the Gardens. Anyway, verse 14. Gethsemane. I'm sorry, I meant to say Gethsemane. Verse 14. As he stepped ashore, he saw huge crowds, felt compassion for them, and healed their sick. Now, what's interesting here is, remember, Jesus wants to be alone. And in case we remember, John the Baptist and Jesus were probably second cousins. Their mothers were first cousins. And so, however their relationship is, it's not that defined. Jesus, of course, um, by the fact that he wanted to be alone, grieved over this senseless death of his cousins. Okay? But notice when the people came, um, the demands of the people, notice he looked upon them, and then what? Against his own needs, he felt compassion for the people. Okay? So when the evening came, verse 15, the disciples approached him and said, "This place is a wilderness and is already late. Send the crowds away so they can go into villages and buy food for themselves." They don't need to go away, Jesus told them. You give them something to eat. But we only have 5 loaves and 2 fish. Excuse me here. They said to him, "Bring them here to me," he said. Then he commanded the crowds to sit down on the grass, and he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking up into heaven, he blessed them. Now, notice Jesus looked up into heaven. I don't know where we get the tradition where we say bow our heads. Notice Jesus looked up. I'm not making a doctrinal statement by that, by the way, just an observation. So, where am I at here? Verse 18 again, no, 19. He commanded the crowd to sit down on the grass. He took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, he blessed them and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And everyone ate and was filled. Then he picked up 12 baskets full of leftover pieces. Now those that ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Now again, this was a miracle, and on this kind of grand scale, notice it was a miracle that the crowds were able to witness. And just to kind of show you, first and foremost, he said that, remember, they counted only the men, so they counted about 5,000 men. And then he says, besides women and children. So just think about this now. I'm just gonna, if we just, let's say if Jesus had said, we need food, someone go to McDonald's, right? Now, and just, okay, since we're using fish and bread, go get a fish sandwich from McDonald's, right? Now I'm going to give you some figures because I'm going to show you the magnitude of the miracle. Notice he said, I want you to go to McDonald's and say, okay, we need 5,000 fish sandwiches. Now, remember, that's just men. Now, if we do count the women and children, we can certainly escalate that number to anywhere from 15 to 20,000. Now, think about that, 15 to 20,000. Now, you will also note that Jesus, it says that they ate and were filled. Not just, here's a sandwich. But let's just, if you go on that, for 5,000 men, you would have spent almost $19,000. For 15,000, crowd, you would have spent almost 56,000 or 57,000. For a crowd of 20,000, you would have spent almost $76,000 on food. And that's only if you provided one sandwich per person. Jesus' style was they ate and was full. And you know how some of y'all is. They would have went back for seconds and thirds. But notice, and then even after that, they had 12 baskets full. Um, you know, now, so keep in mind, they saw this. So verse 22, immediately he made his disciples get into a boat and go ahead of him to the other side. And when he dismissed the crowds, while he dismissed the crowds. So Jesus dismissed the crowds and told the disciples, the 12, y'all get in the boat, go to the other side. Verse 23, after dismissing the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And so notice here, you see Jesus prayed, had a prayer time. Don't make a religion out of it, but just notice Jesus had a prayer time. And then he says, but when the evening came, he was there alone, meaning on the mountain, but the boat was already over a mile from the land, battered by the waves, because the wind was against them. Now, what you also see in the other Gospels is that Jesus was also looking at the boat. They were struggling. They were struggling against the waves and the wind, and Jesus was able to see them, and he. So my point is, he was able to see them. How he saw them, we're not clear. But again, it was windy and wavy, and they were um, um, uh, fighting against the of the winds. But look at verse number 25. Around 3 a.m, he came towards them walking on the sea. Now keep in mind, he's walking on the sea in the midst of a battered winds and wave. He's walking on the sea. I want you to kind of get the picture of that right here. Think about a pond that's frozen over with ice. So you can see a person walk on the water there. No miracle, of course, right? Now think about the same pond in the summertime, right? That is relatively calm. Still impossible for a person to walk on the water. Now think about Jesus walking on a pond, or in this case, the lake. It's wavy enough where they are struggling to roll across, and now Jesus is walking on this water, right? So that's even wow. Okay. So verse 25 again. Around 3 a.m, he came towards them walking on the water. And when his disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. Immediately Jesus spoke to them. Have courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. All right. So here it is. They see this person walking on the water. Naturally, you would be shocked. So Jesus says, have courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. Verse 28. Lord, if it's you, Peter said, right? If it's you, Peter answered him, command me to come on the water. Now, kind of odd request. Now, Peter was known for these wild and impetuous and just unstable thoughts. Who would think that? First and foremost, you see someone walking on the water. Why would it be your first impulse to say, hey, let me come out there with you? Okay, but that's Peter. Okay, that's Peter. But notice what Jesus says. Verse 29, come, he said. And climbing out of the boat, Peter started walking on the water and came towards Jesus. Now, amazing, because think about this. Think about this. Remember, it is still waves battering the boat. It is still wind. Peter said, Jesus, if it's you, bid me come. He says, okay, come. So Peter starts to walk on the water. Right? That's so Jesus, Peter, part of this miracle of walking on the water. Right? He asked, and Jesus said, okay, come. He starts to walk on the water. So, verse 30, but when he saw the strength of the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught hold of him and said, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Right? This is one of these things that Jesus is scratching his head, like, why did you doubt, right? Peter's looking at the wind and all around him, and it causes him to doubt. Why? You were walking on the water. On a calm day, you couldn't walk on the water. You can only walk on the water by the power of God. And instead of recognizing that, Jesus allowed his doubt to come and just feel. The Jews' unbelief, as I said, is unbelievable. That it was amazing that he could doubt. Now, first and foremost, it's amazing that he's even asking the question. It's amazing, first and foremost, that he's asking for Jesus to come. My point is, what would make him even think that? Okay, Jesus said, come. He gets out and he starts walking on the water. So now, why wouldn't he then go, hey, this is pretty cool. Walking on the water, man. This is, why not strut, Why not, walk, why would he doubt? Oh man, the winds, right? This is the same kind of unbelief that caused that first generation of Israelites to miss out on the promised land. You remember God, it was Jesus, but God parted the Red Sea. Now keep this in mind. Let's back up. Look at do a parallel here. They had just saw Jesus multiply 5 loaves of bread and 3 fish, right? And feed anywhere from 5 to 15 to 20,000 people. A miracle, enough that they had 12 baskets left over. Having seen that, now they're on the water. They see Jesus walking on the water, right? So by this time, and by the way, in terms of a time frame, we have rounded third base in that this is the last year of Jesus' ministry. We're coming in on the stretch of Jesus' ministry. This is like we're coming upon probably the last 6 months when Jesus is doing and performing some of his greatest miracles. Around the same time, Lazarus would be raised from the dead. Most of these powerful these miracles that Jesus performed were performed towards this last year, and especially the last 6 months of the public ministry of Jesus. My point to saying that is that they should already now have been established. We're dealing with the Word manifested in the flesh, God manifested in the flesh. So the fact that Jesus walked on the water shouldn't have been a shock to them. Yeah, at first they could have gone, oh my God, yes, right? But then once Jesus said, hey, it is I, oh, it's Jesus, right? Miracle worker, whatever, nothing's too hard for him. But they didn't. And it's the same with that first generation of Israel. They saw God, the God of Abraham, cripple the mightiest nation on the earth. They saw the God of Abraham part the Red Sea water, part the Red Sea. They walk through the water, and they get on the other side. And when God said it's time for you to go into the promised land, they go, we can't go in. Those people are too strong for us. Oh man, we'll never take them. Unbelievable, right? It's unbelievable. So he kind of gives them a rebuke. Why did you doubt? Oh, your little faith. And by the way, when he says, oh, your little faith, keep in mind, faith is everything, right? To say, oh, your little faith, this is not good statement of him either. Not just, we're not talking about just a um, um, self-esteem issues here. You can't have faith, man. You got a problem. You got a major um, spiritual problem. Verse 32. When they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Okay, and then those in the boat worshipped him and said, "The Son of God." Well, here's the thing too. There's no, in a sense, praise of this. They should have already come to this conclusion. In other words, yeah, you shouldn't have doubted in the first place. They should have already come. And what All right. Verse 34. He says, once they crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret, and when the men of that place recognized him, they alerted the whole vicinity and brought to him all who were sick. And they were begging him that they might only touch the tassel of his robe. And as many as touched it were made perfectly well. Now, where did they get that from? Remember back in chapter 9 when the woman who had the issue of blood squeezed through the crowd, and she said, if I could just touch the hem of his garment, I'll be made whole. Again, faith cometh by hearing, and then hearing by the word of God. The news, when they found out that Jesus was here, within their vicinity, they said, "Oh, can we just touch the hem of your garment?" And notice, everyone who touched was healed. That's the kind of faith that they had. All right, guys. Um, chapter. Oh, okay. I don't know what the deal is. I got to look at this. If those of you that was kind of trying to give me some comment here, there is a problem. Again, I got to figure. Some of these problems I'm having with the loading of the comments. I'm not seeing any of the comments here on this program right here. I just got to come back and see. But there was an error loading. I just got to learn how to work this program. It's more what they call operator error. I didn't switch something on. I don't know how to switch something on. But anyway, thanks everyone for tuning in. And chapter 15 in our next study. All right, I'll see you then.